Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. Everything started to unravel on a day that seemed as ordinary as any other. The sun rose at the same time, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen. I was sitting at the table, sipping my cup, watching my kids, Jake and Emma, scarf down their cereal before school. My wife, Sarah, was already out the door, rushing off to work like always. She worked in real estate, and mornings were hectic for her, meetings, showings, whatever she did. We barely saw her during the week. "Finish up, guys, or you'll be late," I said, taking another sip. The usual morning chaos was nothing new, lost shoes, forgotten backpacks, but I managed it like any dad does when his wife has already hit the road. I was used to it by now. After the kids left, I started cleaning up the kitchen. That's when I noticed it. Sarah's phone, lying on the kitchen counter. That thing was practically glued to her hand at all times, so it was odd she had forgotten it. I wasn't suspicious, at least, not yet. I just figured she was in such a rush that she'd left it behind by mistake. I picked it up, thinking maybe I'd text her to let her know, but as I did, the screen lit up. A message popped up. It was from someone named Rick. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. Miss your touch already." My heart stopped. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the screen. Surely, this was a mistake. It had to be a joke, right? Or maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. But deep down, something clicked, a gut feeling that told me this was no mistake. And if I'm honest with myself, it wasn't entirely a surprise either. There had been signs. I had just been too blind to see them. I unlocked her phone, my hands trembling slightly. My mind raced with a million thoughts, each one worse than the last. I scrolled through the messages, and there they were, weeks, no, months of conversations between Sarah and this guy Rick. Some were innocent, but others. I couldn't believe what I was reading. They were meeting up. They were sleeping together. And she was lying to me about it, over and over again. Each text felt like a punch to the gut. They talked about their secret getaways, about how much they missed each other. And there, right in front of me, were the times she said she was at work, but in reality, she was with him. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to breathe. How could she do this to me? To us. We'd been married for 15 years. We had 2 kids, a life together. And she threw it all away for some guy she met, where? At work? At a party? I didn't know, and suddenly, I didn't care. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. Replaced by someone who could look me in the eyes every day and lie. I could have called her right then and there. I could have stormed into her office and confronted her in front of everyone, making a scene that neither of us would ever forget. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down, Sarah's phone still in my hand, and tried to think. My mind raced with everything I had just seen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But more than anything, I wanted to know why. What had I done? Had I missed something? I went through every memory in my head, replaying the last few months, looking for clues. There were the late nights at work, the business trips, and how she always seemed so distant lately. The way she brushed me off when I tried to talk to her, the sudden new interest in her appearance. How did I not see it? Had I been so blind, so trusting, that I just ignored all the signs? I started piecing it together. The way she would always seem distracted, especially when we were out as a family. How she'd pull her phone out constantly, texting someone, and then laughing to herself. I had asked her once, just once, who she was talking to all the time, but she brushed it off, saying it was a friend from work. I didn't push it. I never pushed her. That night came rushing back to me, the night she came home late from one of her supposed work meetings. She had walked in with this weird energy about her, practically glowing. I remember joking with her about how she must have had a good time because she was in such a good mood. She didn't say much, just smiled and kissed me. But now I knew the truth. That wasn't a work meeting. That was him. She was with Rick that night, and she had come home to me with his scent still on her. My hands were trembling now, not just from the anger but from the betrayal. I was torn between confronting her and just walking away from it all. Part of me wanted to see the look on her face when she realized she was caught. But another part of me, a darker part, wanted her to feel what I was feeling, wanted her to hurt as much as I was hurting. I put the phone down and stared out the window. My mind was spinning, thinking about what to do next. Divorce? Maybe. But that felt too simple. Too clean. No, I needed something else. Something that would hit her just as hard as she had hit me. The kids would be home soon, so I had to get it together. I wasn't going to let them see me like this, broken and confused. I decided I would play it cool for now. I'd pretend like nothing was wrong, like I didn't know. That way, I could plan my next move. And when I did finally confront her, I'd be ready. But more importantly, she wouldn't be. That night, when Sarah came home, I smiled at her. I kissed her on the cheek, asked her about her day. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She looked me in the eyes and lied, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I wanted to scream at her, to shout, "I know what you've been doing," but I didn't. I just smiled, biding my time. She had no idea what was coming. In the days following my discovery, I felt like I was living a double life. On the surface, everything looked normal. I got the kids ready for school, went to work, came home, and played the role of the doting husband. But underneath, I was seething. I couldn't stop replaying those messages in my mind, reading between the lines, dissecting every little detail of our life together. Every time Sarah smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, it was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. She had no clue. That was the most infuriating part, how normal she acted, like she wasn't hiding anything. And in a way, that was what pushed me forward. She thought she was in control, thought she could live this double life and I'd never know. But I knew, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I started digging deeper, becoming more calculated. I knew confronting her out of the blue wouldn't be enough. It would be satisfying for a moment, sure, but it wouldn't give me what I needed, the power, the control she had taken from me. I needed to turn the tables on her. I started keeping track of her every move. Whenever she left the house, I'd check her phone, looking for any clue that could help me build my case. I found hotel bookings, dinner reservations in places she'd never mentioned, even more messages between her and Rick. He was bold, talking about future plans with her like they had some kind of future together. It made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to play the role of the perfect wife. She'd still cook dinner for the family, still laugh at my jokes. On the surface, we were the model couple. Friends would come over, and we'd entertain them like always, but every time she touched my arm or leaned in close to me, I felt sick. I had to resist the urge to pull away, to not give her any indication that things had changed. Because I was saving that for the right moment. One night, about a week after I found the messages, we were sitting on the couch after putting the kids to bed. Sarah had a glass of wine in her hand, and I pretended to be engrossed in a movie we were watching. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, typing away on her phone, smiling to herself. It didn't take a genius to figure out who she was texting. "What's so funny?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She glanced up, startled. "Oh, nothing, just work stuff," she said, quickly putting the phone down and turning her attention back to the TV. I smiled, pretending to buy it. "Work stuff, huh? They're keeping you busy lately." "Yeah," she replied, her voice a little too casual. "You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. I didn't say anything more, just kept watching her out of the corner of my eye. She was good, I'll give her that. She'd been playing this game for a while now, and she had it down to a science. But the cracks were starting to show. I could see the little flashes of guilt in her eyes, the slight hesitation in her responses. She was starting to slip, and I was there to catch every misstep. The following day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait around any longer. I had gathered enough evidence, enough proof to make my next move. It wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore, it was about showing her that she wasn't the one in control. I was. It was a Saturday, and Sarah had planned a girls' day out with some friends. At least, that's what she told me. I knew better. I knew she was meeting up with Rick. I had seen the texts confirming their rendezvous at some fancy hotel downtown. She thought she could lie to me, walk out of the house like everything was normal, and I'd be none the wiser. But today, that was going to change. I waited until she left, kissed me goodbye, and told me not to wait up. Then I got to work. First, I called my friend Dave, who worked in the legal field, and asked him for advice on how to proceed. Dave had no idea about the affair, of course, but I told him I was looking into some family matters, and needed to know how best to protect myself. He gave me a few pointers on securing financials, documenting evidence, and preparing for what might come next. After that, I went online and started looking into private investigators. I knew it might seem extreme, but I needed concrete proof of her affair. Not just texts and hotel bookings, I needed photos, videos, something undeniable. If this was going to go down, I was going to make sure there was no way for her to wiggle out of it. By the time Sarah came home that night, I had everything in motion. She walked in, looking a little too relaxed, a little too happy, like someone who had just spent a perfect day in the arms of someone else. But I didn't say a word. I just smiled at her, asked her about her day, and went through the motions of being a loving husband. The next few weeks were like living in a pressure cooker. Every day, I knew I was getting closer to the moment when everything would explode. The private investigator I hired was good, really good. Within days, he had photos of Sarah and Rick together, leaving a hotel, kissing in the parking lot. It was surreal seeing her like that, so comfortable with him, so intimate. The woman in those photos wasn't the same woman I married. Each night, as we sat together in the living room or lay side by side in bed, I wondered how long she thought she could keep this up. I wanted to confront her, wanted to throw the photos in her face and watch the panic in her eyes. But I held back. There was still more to do. One evening, as I was going through the evidence, I stumbled upon something that took everything to a new level. Rick wasn't just some fling. He wasn't just a guy she was fooling around with. He was planning to leave his wife for her. They were planning a future together, talking about getting a place of their own, and Sarah had even started moving money out of our joint accounts into a private one. She was preparing for a life without me, and that was when I knew. It wasn't enough to just catch her. I had to take everything from her. In the days leading up to Sarah's birthday, I made my final preparations. I booked a venue, invited all our friends and family, and made sure everything was perfect. She had no idea what was coming. As far as she knew, I was the clueless husband, still doting on her, still planning a huge party to celebrate another year of our happy life together. The day of the party, Sarah was glowing. She wore a new dress, her hair done up perfectly, looking every bit the beautiful, devoted wife. She greeted guests with a smile, kissed me on the cheek, and played the part of the loving spouse to perfection. But I knew better. As the night wore on, I watched her, waiting for the right moment. I had the photos tucked away in my jacket pocket, ready to be unveiled when the time was right. When everyone had gathered around for the toast, I stood up, smiling at Sarah as I raised my glass. To my beautiful wife, I began, my voice steady. To the woman who has made the last 15 years so incredible. To the mother of my children. And to the woman who's been sleeping with Rick for the past year. The room went dead silent. The silence after my toast was deafening. It was as if time had stopped, like everyone in the room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. All eyes were on Sarah, who stood frozen, her glass of champagne halfway to her lips. The look on her face was priceless, pure shock, confusion, and a dawning realization that her world was about to come crashing down around her. I let the moment stretch, savoring it. The stunned expressions, the disbelief from our friends and family, the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. Then, slowly, I pulled out my phone, the same one where I had stored all the damning evidence, and held it up for everyone to see. You see, I continued, my voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear, while I've been planning this party for Sarah, she's been planning a whole different life with Rick. There was a murmur of disbelief from the crowd, but I kept going, scrolling through the images on my phone. Here they are, leaving a hotel together. I paused for effect, letting people take in the sight of Sarah, my faithful wife, kissing another man in full view of the camera. And here's another one of them, just last week, at the same hotel. Sarah dropped her glass, the champagne spilling onto the floor as she stood there, white as a ghost. I could see her trying to form words, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. But nothing came out. Rick, who had been standing off to the side with his wife, looked like he was about to bolt. His face turned a sickly shade of gray, and he shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the exit as if he were considering making a run for it. His wife, who had clearly been oblivious to everything, stood there in stunned silence, her eyes darting between him and Sarah, trying to make sense of it all. I could have stopped there. I could have let the images speak for themselves, let the weight of the betrayal sink in for everyone present. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. For the last year, I said, my voice rising slightly, Sarah has been lying to me. She's been sneaking around behind my back, pretending to be the loving wife and mother while carrying on this affair with Rick. And they've been planning to leave us. Planning to start a new life together. I turned to face Sarah fully now, locking eyes with her. Isn't that right, Sarah? She finally found her voice, but it was weak, barely a whisper. Mark. I can explain. Explain? I scoffed. What's there to explain? You've been screwing around with him for a year, Sarah. And you thought you could get away with it. You thought you could live this lie and I'd never find out. Her face crumpled, and for a second, I saw the guilt, the shame, the fear all flooding in at once. It's not what you think. Not what I think. I cut her off, my voice cold now. You've been draining our joint accounts, moving money to a private one. You've been planning a life with him. You lied to me, to the kids, to everyone in this room. I gestured toward our friends and family, all of whom were staring at her in disbelief, some shaking their heads, others whispering to each other. Rick's wife, who had been silent up until now, suddenly stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. Is this true, Rick? Have you been having an affair with her? Rick swallowed hard, his eyes wide with panic. It's not, he stammered, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out that would save him. His wife, no longer willing to listen, slapped him hard across the face before turning on her heel and storming out of the room. The scene was chaos now. People were murmuring, some already heading for the door, not wanting to stick around for the fallout. Others were glued to the spot, watching the drama unfold like a car crash they couldn't look away from. Sarah, meanwhile, had crumpled into a chair, her face buried in her hands. She was sobbing now, but I had no sympathy left for her. She had made her choices. She had built this life of lies, and now she was watching it all burn down. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had played my part, and now it was time to walk away. But before I did, there was one last thing I needed to say. I trusted you, Sarah, I said quietly, stepping closer to her. She lifted her head, her tear-streaked face filled with regret, but I wasn't moved. I trusted you with everything, our marriage, our kids, our life together. And you threw it all away for him. She shook her head, reaching out toward me. Mark, please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. We can fix this. We can. There's no fixing this, I said, cutting her off. It's too late for that. I've already filed for divorce. Her face went pale. What? You can't mean that. I do, I replied, my voice steady. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sarah sobbing in front of our friends and family. As I made my way through the crowd, people stepped aside, unsure of what to say or do. Some gave me sympathetic looks, while others just stared in shock, unsure of how to process what had just happened. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of Sarah's betrayal, the months of lies, the anger I had been holding inside, it was all gone now. I had done what I needed to do, and there was no going back. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like a victor. I just felt free. I walked to my car, my mind racing, replaying the scene over and over again. Had I gone too far? Maybe. But then again, maybe I hadn't gone far enough. Sarah had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and while the public humiliation might have seemed extreme, it was exactly what she deserved. As I sat in my car, staring out at the dark, empty street, I thought about what came next. The divorce would be messy, no doubt. We had the kids to think about, the house, the finances. But in that moment, none of that mattered. I had taken back control of my life, and that was all I cared about. I started the car and drove away, not knowing exactly where I was headed. Maybe to a bar, maybe to a friend's place. I wasn't sure yet. But wherever I was going, one thing was clear, I was going there alone, without Sarah. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I felt steady, grounded. The storm had passed, and now it was time to rebuild. And this time, I would rebuild on my own terms. The days after the party felt like a blur. News of what had happened spread fast. Some of our friends reached out, offering support, telling me I had done the right thing by exposing Sarah in front of everyone. Others stayed silent, probably not knowing what to say or how to deal with the awkwardness of choosing sides. But that didn't matter. I was already moving forward. The divorce papers had been filed, the evidence gathered, and Sarah had moved out of the house to stay with her sister. The kids didn't fully understand what had happened. Emma was old enough to know something was wrong, but Daniel, my youngest, just thought Mom and Dad were going through a rough patch. I tried my best to shield them from the truth, to keep things as normal as possible. But it was hard, especially when they asked why Sarah wasn't living with us anymore. I told them we were taking some time apart, but I knew the real storm was coming. The day they'd learn everything, the day the divorce would be final, and our family would never be the same. One night, about 2 weeks after the party, I was sitting alone in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The house felt empty without Sarah, without the usual buzz of the kids running around, without her laugh, her presence. I should have been relieved. I had won, hadn't I? I had exposed her betrayal and made it clear that I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. But sitting there, in the quiet, all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. I picked it up, half expecting it to be another well-meaning friend checking in. Instead, it was a text from Sarah. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, torn between wanting to ignore her and feeling the pull of curiosity. What more could she possibly have to say? I had given her every chance to explain herself, and every time, it had been the same hollow apologies, the same empty promises that things would get better. But something in me, some lingering thread of the past 15 years, made me reply. Come over. 15 minutes later, she was at the door. She looked different. There was no more of the bravado, no more of the confidence that had once defined her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. For the first time in a long time, she looked vulnerable. Mark, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to talk to you. I nodded, letting her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands, looking like she was about to break apart. I stayed standing, unsure of where this was going. I've been thinking a lot about what you did at the party, she continued, her voice trembling. I deserve that. I know I did. But I never realized how much I was hurting you until that moment. You didn't think about me at all, I replied coldly. Not when you were sneaking off with Rick. Not when you were lying to my face. I know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. But it's not as simple as you think. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. Enlighten me, then. Make me understand. She took a deep breath, struggling to get the words out. It was never about you, Mark. It was about me. I was lost. I felt like I wasn't myself anymore. I got caught up in this fantasy, this idea that being with someone else could make me feel alive again. I know it sounds pathetic, but I didn't know how to tell you. And by the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that she had destroyed everything for a fantasy, for a selfish escape. But I stayed silent, letting her continue. I love you, she said, her voice cracking. I never stopped loving you. And that's why this hurts so much. I thought I could have both, the life we built and the thrill of something new. But I was wrong. And now I've lost everything. The room was thick with tension, with unsaid words, with 15 years of shared history hanging in the air. I had no idea what to say. I had prepared for anger, for confrontation, for more lies. But this broken version of Sarah sitting in front of me? I wasn't ready for that. She stood up slowly, wiping away her tears. I'm going to sign the divorce papers. I won't fight you. I wanted you to know that none of this was your fault. You were a good husband, a great father. I was the one who messed up. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to keep my emotions in check. What about Rick? She shook her head, her eyes distant. It's over. It was never real. I know that now. I wanted to feel triumphant, to feel like I had won. But as I looked at her, all I felt was an overwhelming sadness. This wasn't a victory. This was the end of something that had once been beautiful. I had loved her, once. And a part of me still did, even if I couldn't admit it to myself. Sarah turned to leave, but just as she reached the door, she stopped. Mark, she said softly, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. For everything. And with that, she was gone. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing again. I rubbed my eyes, still groggy, and reached for it. It was a call from Sarah's sister. Mark, her voice was shaky, almost frantic. Sarah's in the hospital. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. What? What happened? She overdosed last night. We don't know if it was intentional, but she's not doing well. My mind went blank. I couldn't process the words. Overdosed? Sarah? I had just seen her, just talked to her. She couldn't have. I was out the door in minutes, driving like a madman to the hospital. When I got there, Sarah's sister was waiting for me, her face pale and tear-streaked. She's in a coma, she whispered, her voice trembling. They don't know if she's going to make it. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I stumbled into the waiting room, collapsing into a chair, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? The hours that followed were a blur. Doctors came and went, giving us updates, but none of it registered. All I could think about was the last time I had seen her, the broken look in her eyes, the way she had said goodbye. I should have seen it. I should have known she wasn't okay. But I didn't. I was too focused on my own pain, my own need for revenge. And now, it might be too late. Days passed. Sarah didn't wake up. The doctors told us to prepare for the worst. I sat by her bedside, staring at her motionless body, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I had wanted to hurt her, to make her pay for what she did to me. But I never wanted this. And then, one morning, she was gone. The funeral was small, just close family. I couldn't look at anyone. I couldn't face them, knowing that in some twisted way, I had played a part in this. My revenge had cost more than I ever could have imagined. As I stood by her grave, the weight of it all finally hit me. The anger, the betrayal, the bitterness, it didn't matter anymore. None of it did. All that was left was the hollow ache of regret, the knowledge that I had lost her in more ways than one. In the end, there was no victory. Only loss.